It's working. Oh, wow. It's loud. Yeah. I'll whisper. It's good. Thank you. Welcome to this session on women and climate. And, I'm delighted to have you here and delighted to be hosted by Global Futures Laboratory. Um, we have for you four powerful women committed to the cause of climate and changing the world for good. I'm going to allow each of them to introduce themselves first, then give a short opening, and then we'll go straight into the discussion. Thank you. Chantaline.
Let me see. Does that work? Yes. I'm Chantaline Carpentier. I'm the head of the Trade, Environment, Climate Change, and Sustainable Development branch at UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development. And I'm passionate about the interlinkages between trade, climate change, and sustainable developments.
Phoebe.
I'm Phoebe Koundouri. I'm a professor of economics. I have two chairs, one at the Athens University of Economics and Business and one at the Technical University of Denmark. I lead the Global Climate Hub of UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and I'm also the president of the World Association of Environmental Economists. I'm really passionate about climate neutrality and resilience.
Kia ora, ngā mihi nui ki koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Andy Blair. I'm a co-founder of a company called Upflow from Aotearoa, New Zealand, bottom of the world. My company is a geothermal research and innovation company. We do the really hard stuff that makes science alive in the real world. I'm the immediate past president of the International Geothermal Association, and I'm a co founder of a group called Wing Women in Geothermal 10 years ago this year. And that's about empowering women in the geothermal sector. So, one of our goals is 50% male membership, and we're currently at 33%. So, we're pretty proud about that. So, I'm all about gender, climate tech, and doing good stuff with great people for the good of the world.
Thank you. My name is Sophia Swire. I'm a Brit. I gave up a career in the city and spent the better part of 3 decades working in conflict zones such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, and so on. My lifelong passion has been the empowerment of women through education, skills development, and enterprise opportunity. I believe that if the world is to have a sustainable future, we need to tap into the overlooked, undervalued, untapped talent that comes from female founders globally. My personal passion is investing in women led companies. I'm the founder of an NGO called Future Brilliance, which has been providing skills and enterprise development training in Afghanistan for women. I'm also the founder of the JEDI Network, which is Gender Equity Diversity Investments. And together we are launching the JEDI Fund for MENA, which will be the first fund for the Islamic world, investing at the intersection of climate and gender.
Good stuff.
Thank you. You can see why I wanted these four women to come and talk to you. Um, Force for Good is something I chair, and I'm also the CEO of an investment firm called Greater Pacific Capital. So we in Force for Good look at how do you close the gap on the SDGs overall. And as an investor, we invest hundreds of millions of dollars into seeing if we can make an impact in areas such as financial inclusion, healthcare, education, affordable housing, technology, and so on. And so we have practitioners here from the fields of policy who really make an impact in influencing the decision makers, science and the intersection of science and impact, and also investing. And so we're going to try and draw out those insights just to make it easy and a starter to really get it going. So, Chantaline, what is the nature of this challenge we're facing in climate? Why is it so urgent? And why do you think it's not getting solved?
Why it's not going so well, I will start with that, is because we're trying to address one of the dimension of the sustainable development goal, which is environment, and ignoring the economic and the social part. And we're not going to get the political economy to get there until we do that. My I love the fact that we're amongst women that believe in the women entrepreneurs and scientists, because I do believe that you need to stack the E and the S, and one of the solution will be a lot of these women that come up with these alternative business model that put people in the planet at the center, and then they find a way to make money out of it. So we also, so once you fix the business model, then you need to fix the trade system. And so small task. But for the first time, we have a trade house here at 28. This is the first time. And tomorrow is trade day, which is the first time at a COP, because in the past, we've just assumed that these things were separate. We're not going to achieve the neither climate change nor agreement nor the SDGs without trade. But it's how we trade and that we need to fix.
It's a good starter. Now, Phoebe, you look at data in a very different way, and in a moment, we're going to get you to present some part of that. But just the overview, what's happening and why are we not solving it?
Yes, the overview is that we are facing a multi-crisis. We have slow economic growth, inflationary pressures, shrinking fiscal spaces, and on top of this, we have the climate crisis, the biodiversity collapse crisis, which is even more serious than the climate crisis. And all of this creates it is called the inequality crisis between the global south and the developed world, the inequality crisis even within nations. And all of this inevitably leads to conflict and very self-destructing pathways for humanity. At the same time, in 2015, 163 states have agreed to implement the UN Agenda 2030, 17 goals, 169 targets, which are a very good manual for allowing us to escape from the multi-crisis and get on sustainable pathways. And it's holistic enough, like it has been said, not to ignore the social, the economic aspects, and allow them to sustainably integrate with the environmental aspects. So the SDGs are basically a human-centric way to allow for sustainable interaction in the short, medium, and long run between the environment, of course, natural capital, but also the economy and the society. And what we are working on is to actually detail this interaction into dynamic and spatial pathways so that they are understood by nations, by stakeholders, and they are implementable.
Andy, I'm going to ask you the same question in a slightly different way. You've flown all the way here from a very beautiful place, which you'll say something about, and you know the planet's burning, and all the good spaces will burn with it. Why are we not solving that? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a question I think we all ask ourselves, the ones that have the lens inside the problem. It seems to me that uh, we lack leadership. It's just straight leadership. People don't have the bravery or the courage to do what needs to get done. I think we're asking the people who created the system to disrupt the system they created, and they're never going to do that. So the institutionalized bias around how we see the world and solve problems, we need to crack those open because the same brains that created the problem are not going to solve the problem. And I think the problem is also, in the, my Pacific brothers and sisters who are suffering already of these things aren't they're not the Western white visible people and faces with the deep pockets who their hands aren't burning yet. And it's not really, there's two types of things that happen in the world to motivate people to act. It's either interest, like I'm going to win something, or I have to get away from some pain. And it's usually pain that makes you move faster and harder. And I think that people are just not feeling that pain enough in the places that can make change.
Sure.
Unfortunate thing is that we're going to sacrifice those ones on the way through if we wait. And I think the bravery we need to disrupt the systems we have is our only chance at actually making it happen. And that's what I see.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you. Um, Sophia, You've talked about you've been in the conflict zone, so you've seen what happens when it goes wrong and people fight each other. We can't be too far from that if the crisis of the climate starts to impact the environment, starts to impact societies, prosperity. Um, what do you think is the challenge?
Well, there are those who would argue that the Syrian war was about water scarcity, and we've seen the number of displaced people that were pushed into Jordan and the enormous pressure that Jordan has been under as a result. Um, there are about 108 million displaced people in the world today. A proportion of those are climate related. The vast majority of them at the moment are conflict related. Of course, um, the elephant in the room is what's going on today in Israel and Gaza. There may be another 2.1 million people displaced in the next few weeks or months into the Sinai, where there are very few resources to support anyone and anything. The Institute of Economics and Peace has said that by 2030 there could be 200 million people displaced, that's internally and externally, and by 2050 that could be 1.2 billion displaced by climate events, extreme weather events. So this is a huge, huge problem for security, from the perspective of humanitarian concern, and just in terms of natural resource pressure, where are these people going to go to? At the moment, most refugees or asylum seekers are pushing through the borders in Mexico, obviously, to get into the States and Canada. And then we have an enormous amount of pressure mounting up in countries like Algeria, Libya, Turkey as well. The Afghans are coming in through Turkey. In Tunisia, there were 75,000 refugees jumping into rubber dinghies and sailing to Lampedusa in Italy. The mayor of Lampedusa was having a nervous breakdown all summer and was running around the world trying to raise funds along with the head of Italian intelligence, Elisabetta Belloni, and the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, to build a naval blockade in the southern Mediterranean. In other words, a military solution for what is really a climate problem, a problem of lack of leadership, and a problem that should be solved at source. So, to answer your question, I would say that the greatest brains in the business, everyone in this room, the universities and so on, should be collaborating together to look at the flashpoints, to heat map the areas where where there's an opportunity for intervention. For instance, the Great Green Wall in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, is a way to reduce the temperature locally. Then there's the possibility of investing in companies which can slow the speed of climate change, climate tech, all the green solutions, geothermal that Andy's going to tell us all about. But then we also, in my view, need to prepare these countries to make them more robust and prepare them for an onslaught of people that are coming, whether we acknowledge it or not. They're already coming. They're going to come in much, much larger quantities. And we need to be building their capacity to deal with access to education, health, finance, and so on. Then the only way we're going to be able to do that at scale is by digitizing access. So what we're going to be doing at JEDI is identifying, adapting, and scaling solutions for fintech, health tech, mental health and well-being. After all, many people who are forcibly displaced are highly traumatized, and also enabling them to participate in the global economy through fintech solutions so that they're less of a burden onto their host countries, which are already very fragile states, and hopefully we'll be able to encourage them to live and flourish without putting their lives at risk and putting an enormous burden on the southern Mediterranean and further north.
Thank you. Thank you. Wasn't that wonderful? Look, we just had a rundown of almost the whole agenda. And what we've heard, I think, is that there is political, economic, climate, there are migration issues. The world's interrelated. But for some reason, it feels like somebody else's problem. People look at this, and if you read the IPCC report, you go through it in detail, you start to form many different views. But one view is that this is a problem of the South, and in the North, we're just not going to burn at that rate. That will be uncomfortable enough. But that ignores completely the interdependency of the world. And we're going to touch on that, I'm sure, in the presentation that Phoebe is going to make to us too. Um, what do we think are the consequences of not solving this? Because it seems like the problem people attempted to push out. Since we began in 2015, we've never met the targets, and we don't seem like we will do. So we seem to push it out. Are there consequences that will hurt the richest of countries, the largest of corporations, the biggest of banks, that would make them pay attention? I'll throw it open and then we'll go in sequence. Anyone who wishes to answer.
It is true that the effects of climate change, let's focus on climate change. The geospatial nature of climate change is creating hotspots in the global south, which is very unfair because it is not the global south that is creating the phenomenon. The phenomenon is basically created by the big emitters, which are the US, Europe, China, and India. Some of these countries are considered to be part of the global south, but the hotspot areas are even poorer areas. Are poor areas in the global south. It's Africa, it's the MENA region, it's Latin America, the islands. There is a coalition of the small island states in the COP, which are basically disappearing. Their whole country disappears. 3 of them have disappeared. Their tradition, their culture, their history is just faded away. So there is an inherent inequality and unfairness with regards to who creates the phenomena and who faces the effects. This is the first thing. And this is why we need to restructure the global financial architecture from an ethical point of view in order to streamline capital and resources to these countries in the global south in order to be able to invest in climate adaptation infrastructure, but not just infrastructure, climate adaptation strategies and education and awareness, so that at the first point they can be protected from the increased frequency and severity of climate events. And then these nations need also to be facilitated in their green and digital transition. Because what is important is that they don't go through a fossil fuel industrial revolution. They need to go through development, through increased economic growth, of course, but with green and digital technology. And what is good news is that now green and digital technology is cost efficient, it's competitive to fossil fuel. So it is the timing of the technological innovation is good because it provides cost-efficient solutions for a green and digital development that is possible for the global south. However, in order to be made possible, we need to provide them from public multilateral banks with the help of private money. We need to provide them blended finance of SDG stimulus projects, investments that are transposed into long maturity loans with low interest rates. And we have to do this um, as the developed world, let's say, not just on ethical reasons, but also on self-preservation preservation reasons. These are global problems. Unless they are solved and dealt with, both in terms of the mitigation, reducing fossil fuel emissions, making them net zero, and also adaptation, create resilience against these climate extreme events, we are not going to safeguard our economies and our societies. These are global problems. We are all in it, and we cannot rescue ourselves only by caring about our geospatial territory. We need to care about the whole of the world, and we have the technology, the money, We have put together the policy framework that it works in Europe, it can be replicated, and we need to upskill and reskill the people in order to be able to engage in this huge transformation.
So, Andy, do you want to pick that
Yeah,
up? Because it goes to your point earlier, which is why would the people who have it give it up to somebody else?
sure. And I was talking to my friend last night, and I was thinking, what's an analogy of having something that we know is dangerous, but always putting it aside and waiting to solve it? And we thought about, it's like we've had this diagnosis of an insidious cancer, and it's a slow growing one. And where some of us think we can wait some time to solve it, and other of us think we need to solve it right now and get rid of it. And some people are more comfortable with dealing with other things as they come to your fore. Like you imagine as you live your life and issues come to the front, you deal with those and you put things to the back. But we know we're going to pay a price for that. And some of us are just not prepared to pay that price. And we need to do it earlier. And I think, we talk about, other people, and unfortunately humans say, yes, oh, we worry about other people, but they really don't. They really worry about their immediate life, what they're going to get and put in their mouths today, how they pay their bills today. And until that comes to their door, things aren't going to change en masse. And so, unless the really things are happening right in their face, I think we also, the outsiders, people outside of these conversations, think that someone else is going to solve it. And I'm in the climate tech space, and everyone says, well, you guys will solve it. Where's the climate tech? And I think people forget that everyone in every position is needed to be different to make it work. And the struggle we have in climate tech, everyone in the big institutional investors, all the big banks, everybody says, well, where's all the tech? Where's all this? Just bring us the money, we'll fund it. Well, it's absolute rubbish, because what they mean is bring us stuff that fits the models that exist, and we are going to administratively be burdensome on you to follow those processes we already have. We're not going to change ourselves. And what happens is us climate tech people who have solutions that obviously are not going to fit the old pathways of delivering projects, of outcomes, they're just not going to fit. So what happens is we either reduce our purpose and our impact to fit those boxes to get the money, so it drags out and we don't have the impact, or we fail. And we see lots of climate tech fallout of that. And so those burdensome, all they say is they say, turn up and give us, we want to invest in people, profit, planet, purpose. No, you want us to demonstrate commercial models that fit the old and have the burden of environmental outbreaks as well. And I think until people realize that it's not about climate tech, it's not about politicians, it's also about people in government grants who are writing the funds. It's also the regulators sitting there. It's every single person in a role. Until they're not ready to disrupt and break the model they're sitting in, it's not going to happen as fast as we need it to. And I just hope that we don't really get our hands burnt before we make that move, because we're all going to pay for it.
I think our fingers are burnt already, at least, if not the whole hand. I'm going to ask Chantaline to quickly come in first. Chantaline, we did the analysis. We know all the financial institutions, the largest, are allocating capital. Last year was about $4.5 trillion. It's a huge amount. If we analyze it, though, most of it went from rich countries to rich countries. That's almost all of it. Some of it trickled down to other countries. Why would that change? Because their criteria, as Andy said, is still the same criteria. They manage pension money. They have to pay pensions at the end. They give insurance policies. They have to have an insurance, premium paid at some point back, right? When something happens. So what would change this? Because UNCTAD are at the core of understanding what's going on.
Yeah, I have a feeling, and be curious to see what are those things that we're going to have to go sector by sector. I'll give you an example, and yours was a good example. We're working on maritime decarbonization of maritime shipping, which is 80% of trade. And it's a chicken and egg. So basically, the port won't invest in infrastructure until the alternative fuel is selected. But the maritime shippers won't decide until decision makers decide what's the performance that's required and what so and then the boat owners won't order the boat until they know which technology they need because these boats have a lifetime of about 30-40 years. And if you look at several industries, you would have similar issue. This is this is just an example. So unless you bring the regulators, the investors, the boat owners, authorities, all of them together to address the issue and say, okay, this is not, never going to have perfect certainty. To reduce the uncertainty, to actually put all of the knowledge together and then advance in a quick because there's systemic issues and we're trying to solve them by at a time. It's not going to work. And I would like to just remind, to get back to your earlier question, people that the reason the Bretton Woods Institution and UN were created after World War II was to avoid that we fight and go to war over resources, right? We want to avoid that again. And yet, in the good news is we have a lot of countries that are putting finally the ambitious policies in place to meet the Paris Agreement, like the CBAM and deforestation guidelines and CBAM, carbon border adjustment measurement, and the Green Deal in Europe. The problem is if you do that without consultation and supporting the developing countries, and you mentioned that, so they can actually maintain their market access and they can keep being part of the global system, and you kick them out, you break that trust, you break that that um the system we've been operating in 75 years, go in geopolitical divide again. And it's not conducive to the Paris Agreement. It's not conducive to the SDGs, and we're not going to get there. So I think unless we again break it down by sectors, and I think you alluded to this, Phoebe, the co-benefits and the trade-offs between achieving the climate and the SDGs will be sectoral and will vary by country. So we need to go deep down into each of these, and we have a lot of the data, we have a lot of the information. We know we need to bring people together, but we just need to do it pace.
Yeah. I'm going to ask Sophia to come in. Sophia, you're about to raise a fund. So you have a solution in mind that will make an impact. You know it's going to be a tough journey raising a fund because you're raising the money from people who have the same expectations they had 10 years ago, and maybe even more demanding now because of the risk environment. How do you see this challenge and this solution playing out?
So many of the ladies have touched on the issue of systemic challenges.
Yeah.
One of the challenges for female-led venture capital funds is that by their very nature, it's a new thing. It's trying to disrupt the way investment is deployed. And therefore, most venture capital firms don't have a team track record, even if the individuals do. So the team that we've put together comprises probably the most experienced female investors, certainly from this region, with a top quartile track record. But because we haven't worked together as a team, that immediately disqualifies us from most of the pension funds, many of the sovereign wealth funds, and so on. So there's systemic sort of systems that basically keep the current repetitive investment cycle in place. At the moment in the world, only 1.9% of venture capital funding goes to females globally. In this region, in the MENA region, it's 1.3%, and I'm told that that's going to drop below 1% this year. So there's an enormous amount of bias that needs to be addressed, and I would say that we need to shake up the way that capital is deployed. We need to look at something other than team track record, such as the individual skills and performance records of the individuals deploying the capital. The venture capital firms, the private equity firms need to proactively go out and recruit female investors. At the moment, only about 7% of decision makers on private equity and venture capital boards globally are women. And women are more than twice as likely to deploy capital to other women than men are. So these are the systemic issues that need to be addressed. In terms of how does one get over these challenges? Well, the answer is I think persistence pays. I think one of the characteristics that's required for any startup in life is resilience, persistence, and buoyancy. And I think we need to not only think out of the box and persuade other people to examine how they deploy capital, but also we need to invite our new friends and allies to help us. So probably in this room, there are 3 or 4 people who could significantly help what we're trying to do. You may have a friend who's on the investment committee of the DFC or the IFC or, the EBRD, one of these development finance institutions. You may be aware of some foundation that's looking to deploy capital to climate or gender, or to address the burgeoning refugee crisis. It's sometimes a question of matchmaking a need with supply. And it's that plus, I think, a great deal of persistence, resilience, and, um, you know, time.
I'm going to see if I can help after this, I'm sure. Phoebe, would you set the scene for what you see from your presentation, your research? Short presentation, 5 or 10 minutes, just to set the scene of what you're seeing as the big shifts and changes.
Okay. I'm going to stand up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Professor, you.
Yeah, you know how a professor is always a professor, unfortunately. Okay. So, so the idea is this multi-crisis, how we can use the SDGs to transform it into sustainability. And I lead this Alliance of Excellence for Research and Innovation and IFORIA, which puts together research and innovation institutions, innovation accelerators, science policy networks, and scientific associations to create the capacity that is needed for supporting the science-driven work that we do on the 5 different themes. That is sustainable finance, sustainable pathways for climate neutrality and resilience, sustainable pathways for seas and oceans, sustainable pathways for land use and water, food, energy nexus, and biodiversity, and sustainable education, upskilling, and reskilling. There is a policy framework, the SDGs, the climate agreement, and each region of the world is developing its own policy framework. And if you go back to 2015, you have summary what is there that you need to implement. The flagship example of this policy framework is, of course, the European Commission Green Deal, which is basically the most efficient transposition of the SDGs into a policy framework with regulation, laws, and policies that can actually accelerate implementation. So we have the 4 axes of the European Green Deal: climate neutrality, reduction of pollution, clean tech leadership, and leaving no one behind. We have very importantly the fact that even after the huge non-linearity of COVID, the growth strategy of the European Commission remained to be the European Green Deal, and the 750 billion that came to support the 1 trillion that was committed to the implementation of the European Green Deal were focused on projects that were 37% climate mainstream. And these meant projects on decarbonization, circular economy, nature-based solutions, and e-mobility, and projects that were at the same time of being 37% climate mainstream, also 27% digital. Cybersecurity, deploying digital skills, cutting edge technologies for digitalization, and connectivity, of course. So the European Green Deal is our flagship example. And then we have the climate law, which is the first law that makes it a legal obligation to become climate neutral by 2050. It's the first law across the world, and it's relevant for all EU 27 countries. We have the EU taxonomy that streamlines capital to sustainable investments, and these are explicitly spelled out: climate mitigation, climate adaptation, circular economy, reduction of
Yep.
pollution, protection of water, and protection of oceans, and protection of biodiversity. And on top of this, we have the Fit for 55, 13 laws that basically regulate all of the framework to refine it in order to achieve 55% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions compared to what we have in 1990. And this includes the carbon border regulation, a revision of the ETS, the emissions trading system, laws for the land use system, laws for the energy system, laws for shipping, for ports, for aviation, for vans. So it's a big, very detailed transposition into a legal and regulatory framework, including incentives for all the SDGs. And how we can go about implementing it, the first thing that is really important is to be able to measure. What we do at the Sustainable Development Solutions Network is that we quantify the performance of each and every country in the world against the SDGs, against each of the 17 SDGs, against the 169 target within the 17 SDGs, and for that we use 250 KPIs. So for each SDG and for each country, we have the performance. We know what is the basis. We know where we are. The situation in Europe, we also have the same report for the globe, and we can downscale to the country level, and we can even downscale more to the regional level. Let's explain what the colors means. Red means stagnation with regards to the implementation of the goal. Orange means serious challenges remaining. Yellow means challenges remain, and green means the goal is implementable and not it has already been implemented. And not only we sketch and quantify with clarity, with spatial clarity, the current situation, we also project to 2030, which is showcased by the arrows, in order to see whether the goal will be met by 2030. And a green arrow going up means that this goal will be implemented. And we can downscale to subnational level, and we can also downscale even to the value chain of each product and trace the SDG impact from where the raw material for the product originates to where it is consumed. For example, we have such an exercise for the Amazon forest, and we showcase that 45% of deforestation in Brazil is caused by products that are actually consumed in Europe. So once you quantify, you are able to set the initial conditions for simulating the pathways that will get you to the implementation, the full implementation of the goals. And this is what we do with the Global Climate Hub. Basically, we uh, use the UNSDSN network. It's a huge network with 2,000 institutional members, having a hub in almost each country of the world. And the idea is to accelerate sustainability solutions. Using this network of SDSN, the thematic hub of global climate hub, we call it the UNSDSN Global Climate Hub, is a thematic network across the national networks that exist in each and every country of the world. And basically, we co-design with local stakeholders, all of them, not just science, not just technology developers, but also the policymakers, the politicians, the business, the NGOs, the financial institutions, the civil society. We co-design the transition pathways, and we create transition pathways using these 9 units. And I will quickly go through the units, and that will be it. So 9 units that basically tell you what you need to do in order to design and implement climate neutrality and climate resilience pathways at a national level and beyond. The first unit is about climate data. So we collect, aggregate, connect, and visualize the data that is needed, both the geospatial and socioeconomic data that need to support the models that will develop the pathways. Professor Yannis Ioannidis, who is sitting here with me, is leading this hub. He's the president of the World Scientific Association of Computing Machinery, and he's a world expert in creating these platforms and digital applications for managing large open data that can be supporting that is needed in order to support our climate and energy and climate and land use modeling. The second unit is about atmospheric and physics and climatology. These are people who are working with IPCC, the physics part of the whole thing. And here we make our scenarios, the climate change scenarios, consistent with what is there with the IPCC. Then we have the climate and energy systems modeling. So we use the data. The first unit is creating, and the scenarios that the second unit is creating in order to identify explicit carbonization pathways for each and every country. This is a model we have been developing for 26 years at the Technical University of Denmark, and it's a very integrated systemic model, including all the sectors in the economy, taking into account all the energy sources and identifying the optimal mixture, the optimal dynamic mixture of energy sources, including solar, wind, hydrogen, and so on, for each and every country. And not only that, but also creating the optimal, the cost-efficient corridors for the production and consumption of energy.
Phoebe,
So, yeah, I will finish. So we have expensive pathways for all the energy sources, and then we also integrate this decarbonization pathways with land use pathways. So it's not enough to decarbonize energy and transport. You need to manage agriculture and forestry and land use in a way that it absorbs enough carbon to recarbonize your ecosystems, and at the same time does not emit CO2 and methane, so that you are able to achieve net zero. And we do this for each and every country and showcase how you can meet net zero targets with restructuring diets and increasing productivity in agriculture, so that you can meet your food security targets with climate targets and biodiversity targets. We also integrate the impact on health, climate on health, monetize this impact, both physical and mental health. We also include innovation acceleration because it's crucial. Innovation, both technological, social, financial innovation, are crucial to be accelerated to the market and be integrated in the solution pathways. And then, of course, we work on the just transition. It's not enough to have the pathways, the optimal pathways, the cost-efficient pathways. You need to make sure that you are supporting social cohesion. So here we model pathways of the socioeconomic system that identify who finances what, and also how you care for the vulnerable, how you support the vulnerable parts of the economy that are facing regressive effects from your climate, your biodiversity policies. And we show that you can actually implement all these policies, the climate policies, the biodiversity policies, and at the same time being able to support the vulnerable increase growth, increase the number of jobs, and increase the quality across all the regions, at least within Europe. And finally, we have methodologies for the transformation of companies. Companies need to identify where they need to transform in order to meet their climate goals, their ESG goals, but at the same time remain profitable. So it's about uncovering the wealth of opportunities in this green and digital transition. And we created e-tools that allow us to identify along the value chain of a company where are the profitable transformations that are at the same time consistent with the ESG legal framework. And we can do this for the stock market as well. I close by saying that EPUN is leading, first of all, Connor is leading the company ESG transformation work, and EPUN is leading this co-design of the co-design of these pathways with all the stakeholders. Let me just say that it's impossible to achieve real transformation in such a small period of time unless you co-design the pathways with the stakeholders. You make them engage in the design of the pathways, you make them owners and shareholders of the pathways so that they actually get to implement the pathways. There is no other way to get implementation unless the people who are supposed to implement are really the shareholders of the solution pathways. And of course, in order to do that, they need capacity. They need the skills, the education, the knowledge to do that. So we've invested a lot in that dimension too.
Thank you. Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you. I think we want you back for another 2 hours on that later on. But you can see why we have Phoebe, who's an engine of ideas and innovation and data and really understanding the depth to which we have to go to solve these problems. I'd like to figure out, though, what do you think the solutions are? Because there's no shortage of understanding. We've just heard that. So we understand the problem, and we have pathways that lead all the way to monetizing that. What do you think is if you had to pick one solution or a range even that you think would make the biggest impact, what would that be?
I think, first of all, Phoebe solved it, so we can just drop the mic and leave now. So I think there is complexity and we've got answers to the complex questions, but I also think it's very simple. I think it's very, very simple, and I think people overcomplicate it when it's very basic. And for me, it's, stop contributing to the problem, empower people with solutions, and take everyone with you. And all of that is through so many layers and so much complexity, and people throw up complexity as a hurdle.
Yeah.
And in reality, if we really did those things, those simple things, it would be different.
So Andy, if someone in Europe, if the people in Europe who are consuming 45% of the Amazon knew they were doing it when they made the purchase in the department store or the supermarket, they probably wouldn't do it because they're not bad people. They understood the consequences. People are good everywhere, despite what the news tells us, right? So if they walked in and there was a sign that said, "This is burning this village," or "This is destroying this forest," people are going to put it back down like it was on fire and pick something else up. Is that what you believe too?
I hope so. I hope humans are that good because we're counting on it.
So on that point, I had dinner last night with MasterCard, and I had the head of sustainability on the table, and we were discussing just this issue, the issue of consumption, overconsumption, and the emergent consciousness among Gen Z and the millennials. And what I suggested is that all products should have a QR code on them. So fashion labels should have a QR code, the marmalade, the biscuit tin should have a QR code. And then there needs to be some sort of international certification body that allows the consumer to go in and basically see whether how many hectares of the Amazon is being burnt down, how many women are included in the employment value chain, whether there's any child labor, use and disposal of chemicals, say. Every aspect should be available to consumers to give them choice. And I think one of the things we've been talking about today is time and whether we have time. I think that the millennials, at least in the developed world, have far more consciousness than I think everybody in this room has, because they're another generation, a new gen, and they're demanding so much more of you know producers than we ever did. But the problem is we don't have time for that generation to evolve, and we're also only talking about the top 1% of humanity. So I think Phoebe has solved the world's problems. She's created the template, and I'm really blown away, as I'm sure everybody else in the audience is too. But what I would ask, Phoebe, is what can we do to make your template available to the developing world? How can this be made accessible to Tunisia, Algeria, India, Pakistan, Iraq, all the fossil fuel based economies that need to transition ASAP? Because after all, the world is not the European Union. Unfortunately, it's not California either. When I'm in the States, I'm always talking at family office conferences and so on, and everyone is mad about clean tech and green energy transition in California. Something like 90% of investment into early stage investment in clean tech takes place in the US. Well, guess what? The solutions are needed in Morocco as well, and in Egypt, and in the other developing economies. We don't live on an island, although most of the billionaires are heading to the North Island and the South Island. You're not going to have time, you're not going to have any more room for billionaires. Those in the know who know what's coming down the tracks, they've already bought their farms in New Zealand, right? It's the rest of us that are going to have to deal with the reality, and our children and grandchildren. So I would say, please, Phoebe, what you've presented here today is quite extraordinary. Please do whatever you can to make it accessible to global governments and to the UN and to the World Bank and other entities that can find ways to implement it in the developing world. And I would love if there's any way to underpin our investment strategy with this, I would love to find a way to do that.
We're going to come back to Phoebe. I want Chantaline to come in because Chantaline, um, what is the answer? What's the solution? How does it fit together?
Easy
You
question.
get these, yeah. How are we going to make it happen? Because it's your group that goes and negotiates these complex trade deals that allows grain to flow from Ukraine to somewhere else. You know, you do these very complicated things that unlock the big flows.
Well, let me start by saying that there's 3.3 billion people that live in country that their governments spend more money on servicing their debt than on education and health together. So it's great to have a model and a pathways. You need to finance that. And where's the money going to come from if we keep insisting that these government pay their debt instead of providing education, health, or adaptation, which they have to because we sent the CO2 to the atmosphere. Now they have to adapt and they don't have the money to do it first. Um, the second is I have an issue a little bit with this idea of an international standard because the reason we don't have international standard is because the conditions are very um, varied by countries and by especially by geographic areas. And having one standard for the whole planet, decide that. We don't have one because right now the standards are coming from the north and imposed on the south. And it's and what we're seeing is actually South-South trade increasing because the standard are designed by the North for the North, and they're working for the North, but they're not working for the South. And so again, we're dividing, we're pushing people in camp, which is not working. So one of the idea, I mean, we had, if you recall, in the 80s, right? We had this swap where you would forgive the debt of highly indebted countries if they invested in the MDGs, right? Well, we could do something similar where you have Phoebe's strat that she's developed the pathways, and you say, well, in countries and the pathway, which is shown to be the most cost-effective way to achieve the decarbonization, they will forgive you debt so you can put the money into that. I mean, it's fossil fuel.
That's happened too, right? That is happening. There have been two major swaps in the last 5 years.
Most blue economy,
Mostly in the blue economy.
disease,
No,
but we
not the social impact yet.
thinking
Yes.
creatively. Another area is in the maritime transport. We're thinking of maybe putting a tax on, the maritime on the fuel for maritime shipping, and basically use that money to support the CBAM. We've been arguing on that. The don't understand the carbon border adjustment of the EU is trying to prevent leakage from the EU company now have to pay taxes on carbon to displace the production in another countries where they would have a lower tax or no tax. And they say, well, we're gonna catch a tax at the border when your good come in, the difference between your carbon price and our carbon price. One thing we're saying is that money should not stay in the EU and finance the EU transition. It should go back to developing countries to help organize because we're all the same. So the bottom line is we need to be creative. The Secretary General has talked about taxing the fossil fuel companies that have created the majority of the problem. And basically use that to fund the transition. Bottom line is we know if we know the pathways, we need to find ways to finance them. And
Okay.
the developing countries are first. My last speech, I promise.
No.
And I do believe that developing countries need to be able to produce their own energy, not to buy, not send us the raw materials, minerals, so that they can re-import our renewable energy, and that should be at least 50% owned by women. So thank you so much for what you do, Andy.
Now, just based on what we've discussed so far, Phoebe, you've been always clear on this, right? That we can solve the world's problems because the answers are out there, and you have lots of the answers and lots of the data. It sounds like we need a translation machine that links it straight into the financing engines of the world that says, here are opportunities. And I wonder whether Force for Good should work with you to see if we can package solutions that can be presented to the financial institutions
Yes.
and to corporates too.
Incorporates to where's my clicker? Because I had a slide on that, but it's okay.
Only if it's 30 seconds.
It's less than 30 seconds. I had a slide. Okay. What is important is what it has been already mentioned. You have to finance the solutions. So we can identify the solutions.
Yeah.
We can structure packages of measures that can support a holistic implementation of the solutions. They have to be downscaled, like you said. It's not a copy what is happening in Europe, in the South. We have idiosyncratic features in each and every country and in each and every local authority, and we need to be clever in adjusting solutions according to them. That's why you need the stakeholders to be co-designers. What is definitely needed is to get the private financing, showcase to them how profitable opportunities emerge from this transformation, and they are huge. What is missing, however, before they come in, is serious investment, public investment on infrastructure. Infrastructure is expensive. It is difficult to have it only on private money. You need the public sector to come in with infrastructure. And because the developing world does not have the fiscal space, you need these two things. You need to tackle the high cost of debt and rising of debt distress, and you need to give the developing world long-run loans, 30 years loans with low interest rate. Where are you going to find that? Well, from the multilateral banks. The public development banks need to scale up the financing towards the global south. They need to do that because if they don't, the private money will not come in. They cannot deploy the profitable opportunities without that initial public infrastructure that can be financed from blended finance, but not only private. So they need to scale up the financing, and this is what we are working on with Jeff. I know that you have amazing ideas on this, so this has to be done. There is no other pathway.
Okay.
You have.
So I'm going to draw it to a close because we're in the last 2 minutes. So here's the close. It's almost impossible to close this. But you've heard actually the interaction between the science, the economic policy and trade, all the data flows that allow us to reflect the world, the financing requirement, how migrants and migration and other things will disrupt the North regardless if the South burns. So, and actually what we haven't said is the North, which sits rich today and very happily, and I live there too, is very fragile. How many hundreds of thousands of migrants, not the billions, but how many hundreds of thousands have to enter a European country before they vote for a populist far-right government? Not very many. It's not very many. The politics are very fragile, but the solutions are there. And I think we have an action coming out of this. I think actually we could figure out how we attach something that allows the solutions to flow all the way through from the discussions that we've had. I want to thank you all, and it's great to see 4 women driving the big changes. Thank you. Thank you.